Good evening, everybody. I'm John O'Loughlin. Welcome to my channel. It's called McDuff Lives. And hey, let's relax a little bit tonight. I wonder how many of you have seen the movie In Bruges, 1998 movie from, uh, well, I guess from 1998, but it's Ralph Fiennes and Colin Farrell and some more, some more actors. But uh, let's see. I'm just going to say hello to everybody for a moment before I play my little clip tonight and get the show started. Uh, yes, hello, Son and Christy, Kathy, Tyrone. Always good to see you. Hello, Robert. Thank you for the lesson in Hungarian. The closest I've ever been is Vienna. I was able to sing in Vienna for about 3 weeks in 2015 or 16, and I loved it there. And of course, you get a lot of exposure to Hungarian um, food, which I really liked, and also it's just a very much of a mixture of Central Europe. Um, Interesting, and really enjoyed it. So someday I would love to go back to Vienna, but I wouldn't want to be there right now because they would beat me up. They would absolutely pepper spray me. They would push me to the ground and kick my ass because I'm not one of the people that is going to conform with their ridiculous mandates and laws and things. By the way, just so you know, there is, if you don't know already, RFK Jr. is sponsoring a march against mandates on Sunday this weekend at the mall. I'm not going to go. Just because of my situation with drummer. I want to, we're staying close to home, take care of each other. But anyway, I'm glad that he's going, and I certainly do hope that everybody has a safe time there. I don't know. It's funny. I talked to Kathy Sue. Hello, Kathy, on the phone this morning, and she was expressing how uh, this current the Omicron is very dominant uh, in the conversation in California. That, in other words, they're back to wearing masks and everything. We here in this county just defeated the mask mandate. They're deciding it on a county basis right now, except for state employees who have to wear them, and of course the healthcare workers. But anyway, I don't want to get into that. I'm trying to keep it light tonight. Excuse me just a second. Yeah, I had the most amazing run as a singer, and I'd love to get back to it. Right now, you can't even go on stage without having a certificate. You know, let me see your papers. So I'm not interested right now. But it did take me about 4 years to recover from the prostate cancer, and then the treatment was the radiation, and it takes a lot out of you. It really does. So I wasn't able to do things like drive all over around the city to go to uh, auditions or even more importantly to coachings and voice lessons, which is what you really have to do. It's amazing, the higher you get up in the singing, the more the more important it is for you to keep studying, keep having a teacher and a coach to prepare your roles. But when you do that, and if you've been very, very lucky, then you get to perform on stage. And I had that pleasure many, many times with some absolutely fabulous colleagues. Good morning to Tom Colby, who is obviously looking at the sunrise from the other side of the earth. Fascinating. Isn't it great to think about things like that? And here we are talking all the way around the earth via satellites. Um, well, it's a kind of a funny scene. Let me ask does anybody remember the scene I'm talking about from In Bruges, in which it involves the war of the midgets? And if not, I'll tell you a little bit about the movie anyway. It starts off with these two hitmen, and they're kind of really lousy hitmen and down on their luck, and they've gotten sent to Bruges in Belgium, which is this old, medieval city, which is some kind of a tourist attraction, but they don't find it very interesting at all. In fact, they're bored out of their skulls, and and so they end up getting a bunch of drugs and alcohol and some prostitutes in a motel room, and there's this fellow there that they've picked up who was an actor who was a midget, and they're getting really, really high, and then this fellow that is the midget. Um, Played by Jordan Prentice, by the way, just to give him credit because I love his scene, is goes on a rant, and this is the subject of what I wanted to show you tonight. So let's go ahead and play this. All right, here we go.
Saying, Mother, I know that you'll agree, but I've given
There's gonna be a war, man.
my soul.
I could see it. There's gonna be a war between the blacks and between the whites. You ain't even getting any uniform no more. This ain't gonna be a war where you pick your side. Your side's already picked for you.
I don't know whose side I'm fighting on. Fighting with the blacks. Whites are gonna get their heads kicked in.
You don't decide this shit, man.
Well, who are the half-cats gonna fight with?
The blacks, man. It's obvious.
But what about the Pakistanis?
The blacks.
What about... Think about it. What about the Vietnamese?
The blacks!
Well, I'm definitely fighting with the blacks if they got the Vietnamese. Hang on. Would all of the white midgets in the world be fighting against all the black midgets in the world?
Yeah.
That'd make a good film.
You don't know how much shit I've had to take off of black midgets, man.
That's undeniably true.
See, Jimmy, my wife was black, and I loved her very much. And in 1976, she was murdered by a white man. So, where the fuck am I supposed to stand in all this blood and carnage?
Did they get the guy who did it?
A friend of mine got him.
Harry Waters got him.
So tell me, Jim, whose side do I fight on in this wonderful war?
I think you need to weigh up all your options and let your conscience decide, Ken.
right down to
2 monkey hookers and a racist dwarf. I think I'm heading home.
Yeah? I think I'll come with you.
Hey, what?
Back off, Shorty.
You don't know karate. Ah!
Don't say you didn't have a cover. Short arse.
All right. So there's going to be a war, the blacks against the whites. But it's not, you're not going to wear a uniform. You're not going to need a uniform. Your side's already picked for you. It's a different kind of war. And Colin Farrell, the Irishman, well, they're both Irish, but Colin Farrell is just tremendously Irish. His sense of humor is perfectly Irish. It's beautiful. Um, and says, "Well, I'm fighting with the blacks." Well, he just said you don't get to choose, but he says, "Oh, I'm fighting with the blacks." And then it comes down to the midgets, and he says, "Yeah, the white midget's going to fight the black midgets." Yeah, yeah. And wait a minute, wait a minute. What about the he says the half? I think he calls them half breeds or something. And then he says, "Well, what about the Pakistanis? Blacks, man. It's obvious, obvious, you know." So anyway, I guess it's it's a very, very funny but sad, melancholic scene where these losers are being told by what I guess some type of he's kind of like the function of a an oracle, right? Like if you think of the midget character as an oracle, telling he's had a vision and this is he's sharing it. Well, now this is a film that's being put out in 2008, and so much of what they send out, is really this does have an underlying message. So I was thinking about what I've been studying this week, and race is very, very important. Yeah, I didn't think he was going to chop the beef this time around. Hello, Michael and Melissa, Corky. Welcome, everyone. Okay. So that's my kind of fun lead into the ideas that I've been studying after studying synarchy, and of course I'm still learning from it. Someone was kind enough to give me a link to Daniel Sheehan's essay, not essay, classroom. He's teaching a class. It seems to be a university level class on the Kennedy assassination, and he is truly one of the great experts in it, and a lawyer who's exhibited a great deal of courage and dedication through the Christic Institute over the years, and so he's very much worth listening to. I have listened to a number of his presentations. There's a set of Daniel Sheehan's called The Octave, or it's about, he puts together a series of scenarios which may explain the JFK assassination. And it's kind of like a Russian doll in that he starts with the most biggest obvious one, and then he pulls that one aside and moves on to the next one. And so through the series of 6 or 7 videos, which unfortunately he never unfolded the last one. He never told us, who was what his very, very deepest theory was. But at the same time, he was able to go through an awful lot of the different players, and I think it's really worthwhile to look at that. But the one that I was sent, well, I had never seen it before. It's called Number 13, and it does make reference to the Torbit Memorandum or the Torbit documents. And he does spend a good bit of time discussing the question of credibility. He doesn't say exactly who he thinks may have been involved in this uh, preparation of it, but it's clear that the likely suspect is the CIA that would have been wanting to uh, throw the guilt away from themselves onto somebody else, i.e., J. Edgar Hoover, Division 5 of the FBI, and the Defense Industry Security Coordinator, or whatever it's called, DISC, which you can hear about in my most recent show, number 7 on Synarchy. But this all has to do with race in a kind of an interesting global way that I got from watching this Daniel Sheehan presentation. And what he was saying is there is a group of elite, wealthy families, banks, and the usual suspects, the Morgans, the Harrimans, the Rockefellers, the DuPonts, that during World War II were had that had actually financed the rise of Hitler before the war, and then during World War II were still involved in doing trade with the Nazis all around the world, especially in South America and through Argentina, but everywhere. We talked about Vichy and how Admiral Darlan and all of these Vichy French were actually just as much Nazified as the Nazis themselves in many cases, and were cooperating with the Nazis. So this synarchy that we've identified centered around the Catholic side in Spain, the Catholic side in France, the Vatican, Mussolini, Vatican Pact, and then of course the really independent operation of this what became Gladio, which had started off during the war as the Dechimamas, special ops, anti-submarine warfare, and later um, as a kind of a mercenary group against the communists after the war to make sure that the communists did not get political power. And the importance to the synarchy of keeping the communists out of power is just tremendous. So that's how that part of it comes together. It comes together in a kind of a way that reminds me of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, getting back to Vienna, where the empire is saying it's not about race, it's not about language, it's not even about religion, it's not about culture, it's not about anything. It's about raising, well, it's about creating a higher culture, the Baroque and the beauty of old Vienna, the empire, and all of them working together, kind of like a United Nations in a way. The dream is that all the people will work together under a wise emperor, an empire, but a good empire, right? Now, those are the ones that end up supporting Hitler and Mussolini. in the United States at the time, in the 30s and the 40s, that we had the Democratic Party, extremely progressive, Henry Wallace, and uh, a lot of very, you might say socialist, but in fact, if you look at it, it's the communist ideas from people like Henry Wallace and others we've talked about. Um, those people are never going to agree with the synarchists of the old money, the black nobility synarchists. Nevertheless, they cooperate with them in order to keep everybody else down. So who works with them? Well, that's the British banks. And that's why Roosevelt had to get Britain to fight against Hitler. Because if the British aristocracy were allowed to do what they wanted to, then they would have basically invited Hitler to come over and take over the country. Because Hitler was, talking to the Kaiser, to the Prussian, the Junkers, and everybody about how he's going to get their honor back and they're going to be restored to their, wealth, just to sell the idea of supporting him as the chancellor. But here's what Daniel Sheehan said. He said that these people, and I'm back to the Wall Street, City of London people, see a Caucasian elite running the world. And the Caucasian means white. And I think what it means more specifically is Anglo-Saxon. Which brings me back to the other little asides in our scene from the movie a little while ago, where the two Irish guys kind of under their breath say, what about Ireland? Isn't that if you have any affection for Ireland at all, then you understand what the depth of that thing is, that the Sassenach, the Saxons, the ones that come and burn down your churches with all the people in them, those Saxons. Do we fight with them? Well, that's why our character Ray says, "I'm with the blacks. I'm fighting with the blacks." That's one of my other pet peeves is I have a book. I don't have it at hand, or I'd show it to you, but it's by a guy named Ignatiev, which obviously is a Russian name, Ignatiev. And the name of the book is How the Irish Became White. How the Irish Became White. And he goes through the immigration, early immigration. Pardon me. But he talks about the Irish gangs, the 4 Points gang and the Plug Uglies and the other names of the gangs from the early 19th century. And then he talks about the Irish that fought for the Union in the Civil War, the famous Irish Brigade, Thomas Francis Maher. What a tragic story it is. You can study that. I would I would tell it to you, but there's so many great books on it that are so well written. You should just study the Irish Brigade on your own. Those guys thought they were earning their way into society. That was what Maher sold them on. Said, you guys, we'll fight for this country and then we'll be part of it. So they did. And about maybe 40 miles west of here is a little town called Fredericksburg, where there came a time when the great, brilliant General Burnside of the Union side had gotten his troops trapped between Mary's Heights and the Rappahannock River. And the distance between them is about a mile. And the troops that are down in the lowland by the river are organized in regiments. And about 2/3 of the way up the hill, there is a stone wall. And the stone wall is perfect cover for the Confederates who fill the road behind the wall and have plenty of guns to hand back and forth and fire and shoot and trade back and forth and just totally wipe out anything that comes up that hill. But those Irish men, when General Maher said, let's go, they had a sprig of green in their caps. And they marched right on up into that wall and got slaughtered. It wasn't anything unique about it. It wasn't because they were Irish. They just happened to be the next regiment that needed to get slaughtered to make sure that the rest of Burnside's army didn't get slaughtered. Because the way that battle went, Burnside had exposed his men to that cannon fire from up on top of the hill when he took the town of Fredericksburg, and bloody fighting. But once he took the town, he was stuck down there. And this was where he could have actually lost the war if, instead of feeding more regiments up into the stone wall, if he had stopped, then all the Confederates behind that stone wall would have jumped over it and come rushing down the hill with their bayonets fixed and driven all of the Yankees into the river. And that would have been the end of Burnside's army. So he had to keep doing it. And that's what you have to do in war sometimes. You just have to sacrifice, thousands and thousands of men. Good reason not to go to war. Now, back to what I was trying to say from the movie In Bruges. If there is a new kind of war coming, I think it may very well be exactly what the movie says. Blacks against whites. Because if all of this genetic study, and I take all of this stuff is going on, like Mark says, is to gather data, to understand deeper and deeper, the differences between people and what they would need to do to change people, to control people, or perhaps even to eliminate people based upon certain genetic characteristics. So is that really the weaponizing part of it? Is to say, let's find out how we can let some pathogen out that will only attack people with this kind of skin, or some characteristic associated with what we call race. Well, what would it? Why wouldn't they want to do that? Especially when you think of the Caucasian orientation of the Wall Street, City of London, Stanford gang. Those people are racists. They're very, very clear about it. Let me go over to an article I was reading. I've decided I wanted to learn more about Henry Wallace. So I went to my go-to first place where I want to learn about somebody from this era is to LaRouchePub.com, and went to an essay that they did back in 2019, not too long ago. And let me give you the name of the author. Oh, I know who it was. It's our good friend David Shavin. David Shavin, the violinist that we talked about, all of the Mozart and Beethoven and the operas. We had a 4-hour series, 4 Friday nights with David about 6 months ago. So he's written this article that I'm about to share a part of with you. Let me scroll down and read this. Okay. Churchill, all you get is a dirty brown. For the first year and a half of the United States entry into the war, Roosevelt had experienced Churchill's duplicitous stalling tactics. Roosevelt and General George C. Marshall would secure agreement from Churchill and the British Joint Chiefs for the direct assault on Nazi Germany by means of a cross-channel invasion. And Churchill would instruct his Joint Chiefs to ignore the agreements. Roosevelt and Stalin knew that the British meant to have Germany and Russia chew each other up. Roosevelt's commitment to a post-war alliance of the great powers for real economic collaboration was put in serious jeopardy. At this critical juncture, it was Henry Wallace who took the lead in confronting Churchill. In May 1943, Churchill came to Washington to sabotage yet another invasion agreement. I should explain what he's talking about is that as you know, the Soviets wanted a second front opened, like yesterday, and they kept trying to get it opened. And Roosevelt would have gone along with Stalin, but Churchill, no, he didn't want to open it yet. We weren't ready, blah blah blah, and then they had to go all the way down and to North Africa and up that hard way. Well, long story short, the theory here is that Churchill was delaying the invasion because he wanted Germany and Russia to keep bleeding each other to death. And they certainly did. Okay. Now, as the stalling game got more and more transparent, Churchill tried to do what can only be described as attempting to, quote, get real with Roosevelt, with an appeal to Roosevelt's high-born nature, that only the Anglo-Americans could run the world due to Anglo-Saxon superiority. Henry Wallace took the lead in confronting Churchill's racist and incompetent view. Wallace described the British Embassy luncheon of May 22nd, quote, Churchill was all the time building an atmosphere of we Anglo-Saxons are the ones who really know how to run the show. Then the White House's reciprocal luncheon 2 days later, and this is a quote of Wallace, apparently, my frank talking with Churchill at the Saturday and Monday luncheons has caused the British to reach the conclusion that I am not playing their game of arranging matters so that the Anglo-Saxons will rule the world. If we try to rule in the spirit which seems to be animating Churchill, there will be serious trouble ahead. I am quite sure, in spite of all his protestations to the contrary, that Churchill is capable of working with Russia to double-cross the United States, and with the United States to double-cross Russia. I said bluntly that I thought the notion of Anglo-Saxon superiority inherent in Churchill's approach would be offensive to many nations of the world, as well as to a number of people in the United States. Churchill had had quite a bit of whiskey which, however, did not affect the clarity of his thinking process, but did perhaps increase his frankness. He said, "Why be apologetic about Anglo-Saxon superiority? That we were superior." Finally, Wallace later recounted a bit more of that interchange. Quote, "Like so many Tories in England and the United States, he believes in the innate superiority of the Anglo-Saxon or Teutonic strain. I argued with him against a permanent Anglo-American bloc, but I pointed out that if we were to have a bloc, there is more justification for an alliance with Latin America than with England." He turned to me fiercely and said, quote, "I am a painter, and I know if you mix the colors, all you get is a dirty brown." Unquote. So that is Churchill. And when you had Henry Wallace as vice president, if anything happened to FDR, of course, then you'd have Henry Wallace and the British. Well, obviously, the British can't possibly imagine having to deal with Henry Wallace. I mean, that would be the end of their Anglo-Saxon American dream, you know? And imagine Churchill working with the Soviets against the United States. Well, it's a very tough game, and as the who was it said, one of them 19th century prime ministers, I think it was Palmerston, that said that we don't have friends, we only have interests. So there you go. They might say it's a special relationship, but only to the extent they can control it. Now that brings us right up to today with the Anglo-American domination of the Atlantic Council, the Anglo-American driven NATO policy. All of this seems to me to be creating another block of what looks to me like a Anglo-Saxon, Caucasian, Nordic, Teutonic. In other words, the same people, and they are racist. They believe, just like the ancient, these old esoteric books that tell you, like Theosophy and all, that there's different ranks of humanity. And we know that's not true, and but their whole world depends on it being true, so they won't change, because if they had to admit how wrong they've been, then their whole empire would fall. But they have been wrong, terribly, terribly wrong. And it doesn't matter what your religion is, if you are of the opinion that you belong to the superior form of humanity, then that's the problem. So on the other hand, on the other end, you had people like Henry Wallace, who believed in the common man, the common person, the Joe the plumber, right? Now he wasn't Joe the plumber. He was very sophisticated, well educated, and somebody who'd made some money. But he was very happy to take on this idea of Anglo-Saxon superiority. And that's what I think we love about Roosevelt and Wallace and our progressive side, is that we are not royalists. We are true to the Declaration of Independence, where it says all men are created equal. doesn't say all men are created with the right to have, you know, the same thing. But what it means is that we're not created in different layers or levels so that some are noble and some are serf. That's the main thrust of the Declaration of Independence, is that one mankind is one species, period. There is no nobility, there's no blue blood, there's no dragon blood, there's no superiority based on what your RH factors are. It's just all, and that's the basis of jurisprudence in this country. And thank God we got past the racism in terms of our law. But race is still very, very important because that's still driving the old system, the old systems. So can you imagine the Allies in World War II once again confronting the axis of World War II? And the axis of World War II would develop a biological weapon to get rid of Caucasians. Except for, their friends that they give the antidote to, right? But the Anglo-Saxons are going to say, well, wait a minute, I think I got a better idea. I think we're going to get rid of everybody that is not Caucasian. So they make different concoctions of the biological weapon. Because the idea is, geez, you got to get rid of those other people. They're never going to change. They're never going to change. The ones that think that that they are the inheritors of this imperial tradition, that they are now the select families, the ones that have been chosen by God to rule the world. And some of them have formed a block around the idea of Anglo-Saxon superiority. And some of them have found a block around the idea of an imperial superiority that basically goes back to the old empire of the Holy Roman Empire, and the authority to appoint the kings resting ultimately with the Pope, so that you had a top-down empire based upon the religion, as opposed to an empire based upon what? Upon race, or just it's an empire based upon commerce and trading, and not respecting human rights around the world, just taking whatever you need to because you have the right to, because you are belonging to the superior race that's going to develop the world and get rid of the lesser people. If you grow up in a society that believes that, it's awful hard not to, even though you see the evidence. And they continue to feel threatened. People like Howard Hughes that becomes a recluse because they're afraid, or at least he got paranoid through the help of Robert Mayhew and whatever friendly concoctions that were supplied. But there's where I can't help but wonder if that's where this genetic CRISPR technology is headed, to a race war where one side is trying to get rid of the majority of people that are have the characteristic of being Caucasian, and the other side is trying to get rid of the ones that have the characteristic of not being Caucasian. All right, boy, I have been on a ramble, haven't I? Let me check in to see if you guys have anything to add to that. Did you miss how the Irish are not white? I don't know. The Irish are not white. You just have to take it for granted. Mm. Anyway, that's my opinion. Because of really pink. If you look at your typical Irish skin, pink, we're pink as Paddy's pig. That's what they say. Well, I had fun expounding tonight upon my little theory. Maybe I'll just play this again because I enjoy it. And we do have to take it light. Um, this kind of thought is heavy, heavy, heavy. But I was able to say it because I was able to step back from it and just look at how absurd it is. Look how absurd the idea of a race war based upon biological genetic warfare. And here we are actually seriously thinking about these things. Yeah, maybe they're coming up with a plan to get rid of white people, or maybe they're getting a plan to get rid of everybody that's not white, or maybe they're getting to just gonna get more and more specific so that they find somebody that has so much of this and so much of that. But then they'll say, oh, I know what they do. They'll find the genetic information on somebody they want to get rid of, right? And then they'll say, oh, okay, well, this is exactly the way that we can get rid of him. He has this one little genetic thing that we can take care, we can take advantage of, and it'll look like he died of whatever, some kind of cancer. So specifically, they may be using it to learn how to just really specifically do a stealthy cancer case or something. But more generically, are they not looking at the human genome as a big project, trying to get everybody's DNA? You know? Hey, hey, Professor Hamamoto. Yeah, yeah, the paddy wagon should be called the ethnic wagon. Yeah, well, that was because the Irish were the cops in Boston and New York City and Chicago, and so the cops started getting assailed with being called paddy. Yes, it's a bit of a put down, or was back then. I don't know if it is anymore. Strawman says this is the last stand of the Nazis. Well, I think I've felt that way myself, Strawman. I think maybe it is, and this is why maybe that's why my dad's story is becoming. Uh, it became a time in my life in which I needed to tell it because my dad it really represents who we are. I think the more I've studied him, the more I realized that he grew up in the old Catholic Church. When you had right and wrong drilled into you, and the fear of hell, and because he was brought up not by his parents but by his paternal grandparents' family, and specifically his aunt Liz, who was a spinster that lived with them and was the disciplinarian. I understand that he had a pretty very strict childhood. So he had a character of very, very strict and had to do right, always had to do the right thing, or he would get punished. And and that was part of who he was as he went through life. And so when these people come along and try to get him to compromise morally, he just couldn't do it. You know? And then when the great blessing of learning from Doug Valentine, uh, his sending these guys out on a mission into Laos to try to bust the CIA doing drug deals with the Laotian drug dealers, then you realize that he's there. Not only is he standing up for his own conscience, but he's also trying to help the country to get back on the right track. And that's why I think, this story that I'm telling about my dad, I just offer it because, yeah, this is the last stand. If we lose this one, then we're all going to have numbers. We're going to have numbers. It's going to be just like, the, the worst of the concentration camps. We're all going to be numbered, and we're all going to be taking whatever shots they want us to take, and the end of freedom. So, you know, let's keep on marching and keep on going in the right direction, but let's not give up hope, and remember that we have your family. You have the people in your family that have stood up. That I love the lyrics of American Anthem by Gene Shear, which I've sung uh, often on the show a few years ago when we were first getting started. But for those who think they have nothing to share, who believe in their hearts there's no hero there, know each quiet act of dignity is that which fortifies the soul of a nation that will never die. Let them say of me, when my days are through, America, America, I gave my best to you. And that's what President Kennedy asked, and that's what think I feel that's my duty, is to give my best, you know, do my best to do my duty. Yeah, I was Boy Scout. So those of us that kind of have that old idea of, yeah, duty, honor, country, justice, do the right thing, and to not do that compromise, not take that Faustian bargain. We're the ones that will ultimately inherit the the structure that still remains of our republic. Good night, everybody. Thank you.